On the morning of October 3rd, 1984, a field notebook stopped mid-sentence. The handwriting belongs to a geologist named Reyes, one of 4 members of a caving expedition sent to survey an unnamed limestone system in a remote mountain range. His last entry reads like every entry before it. Coordinates, air temperature, a note about rope tension, and then nothing. No signature, no closing mark. Just white space where the rest of the page should be. His climbing partner, a woman known in the surviving records only as Kavos, was the one who called it in. She told the search team that Reyes and 2 others had descended into a side passage that wasn't on their official map. A shaft they'd only found that morning. She said, they were supposed to be gone 20 minutes. They were gone for 11 hours. When rescue teams reached the entrance, they found the group's climbing gear stacked neatly 40 meters from the mouth of the cave. Not scattered. Not abandoned in a hurry. Stacked. The way you leave something when you intend to come back for it. One rope anchor, driven into the rock near the entrance, was frayed almost all the way through. Not cut. Frayed, as if something had been pulling against it slowly, for a long time. 3 of the 4 who went in that morning were never found. The 4th member of the group, a porter who had stayed behind at base camp with altitude sickness, gave the search team the last confirmed sighting. He remembered Reyes checking his watch twice in the space of a few minutes before entering the shaft. Not out of urgency, he said, but the way someone checks a watch when the numbers on it don't seem to match how much time has actually passed. It's a small detail. It's the kind of detail nobody writes down unless years later it turns out to matter. Meech teams spent 6 days working the known passages of the cave system before officially suspending the operation. They never located the side shaft Voss described. In every debrief since, that absence is treated as the search team simply missing an opening in low visibility. But Voss herself, in her one full statement, insisted she led rescuers to the exact rock formation where the shaft had been. When they got there, she said it wasn't a shaft anymore. It was solid wall. Before we follow that notebook any further, it's worth knowing that most of what you're about to hear comes from records that were never meant to sit side by side. A rescue log here, a government file there, a survey buried in an archive for 40 years. Piecing them together is the only way this story makes any sense. So if you want to see where each piece leads, stay with it. It gets stranger the deeper you go. K. Voss gave one full statement to investigators before she stopped speaking to the press entirely. In it, she described the moment she realized something was wrong. Not the disappearance itself, but what came before it, she said. Reyes had circled a set of coordinates on their working map that didn't match the coordinates in his notebook. 2 numbers for the same shaft, off by nearly half a kilometre. At the time, it read as a simple transcription error. Cavers make them. Fatigue, bad light, a pencil slipping on wet paper. But when investigators later cross-referenced Reyes's numbers against the official expedition map filed with the Regional Geological Survey, they found something that didn't fit that explanation. The coordinates in his notebook pointed to a location the official map didn't acknowledge existed at all. If it was a mistake, it was a mistake that erased an entire section of cave. The village closest to the site had known about that section long before 1984. 3 elders interviewed decades later, as part of a regional oral history project, described a shaft their grandparents had warned them away from, not with folklore about monsters or curses, but with something closer to a rule. Don't go past the second chamber. Don't camp near the opening after dark. One elder recalled her grandfather calling it the place that doesn't let you count right. A phrase nobody in the village could fully explain, only repeat. When researchers pulled the earliest regional cave surveys, hand-drawn maps from Western scientific expeditions decades before Reyes's team ever arrived, the shaft the villagers described wasn't marked. Not omitted by accident either. The maps show a deliberate gap, a blank space in the line work, exactly where local testimony places the passage. Cartographers don't usually leave blank space by accident. They leave it when they don't know what to draw, or when they've been told not to draw it, so now there were 2 separate records. One modern, one generations old, both circling the same unmarked space in the rock, for 2 very different reasons. A second elder, interviewed separately and unaware of what the first had said, used almost the same phrase without prompting. describing the passage as a place where the walking takes longer than it should. Investigators who noted this considered it a shared cultural expression, the kind of phrase that travels through a small community over generations. But when they checked, no linguist working in the region could find the phrase used anywhere else, in any other village, in connection with any other location. It appeared to exist only here, only about this shaft. That's when the paper trail stopped being folklore and started being government record. In 1962, 22 years before Reyes descended into that shaft, a state-sponsored geological survey team had already been to this cave system. Their report still exists, filed under a mineral resource assessment program that had nothing to do with tourism or exploration. It was looking for extractable deposits. Buried in the appendix is a single depth measurement for the system, 612 meters. The depth listed on every published map after 1970 is 340 meters. A cave doesn't get shallower. Erosion, collapse, sediment, none of it explains a reduction of nearly 300 meters in 8 years. Either the 1962 team measured wrong by an enormous margin, in a field where their other measurements check out against modern instruments almost perfectly, or something about the deeper section of that cave was deliberately left off every map that came after. Researchers combing the 1962 file found a second detail easy to miss on a first read. In the surveyor's closing notes, before the official summary page, there's a single handwritten line that doesn't appear in the typed report at all. Recommend restricted access pending further review. No further review is on record. No follow-up survey exists. The recommendation simply sits there, unanswered, for over 2 decades. The lead surveyor on that 1962 team, a man named Aldous Ferrand, left behind more than the official file. His personal field diary surfaced decades later in a university archive that had acquired his papers after his death, uncatalogued for years among unrelated material. In it, Ferrand describes reaching what he calls the true floor of the cave, a chamber his official report never mentions by name. He writes that the temperature there ran nearly 10 degrees warmer than the passages above it, and that the walls, in his words, did not echo the way rock should. Nothing in Ferrand's diary claims anything supernatural. He was a working geologist, cautious with his language, careful to separate observation from speculation, which is exactly why the entry stands out. When a meticulous scientist starts describing a chamber his own published report pretends doesn't exist, and does so using the driest, most clinical language available to him, it reads less like exaggeration, and more like a man choosing his words carefully around something he wasn't supposed to write down at all, till Reyes's team walked in without knowing it had ever been made. A records request filed decades later for the full 1962 survey file returned something researchers weren't expecting. Pages, actual, physical pages, but with entire paragraphs blacked out under a Mineral Resources Ministry redaction stamp, not the whole report. Selective sections. The parts describing surface geology remain untouched, fully legible, mundane. The parts describing what the surveyors found below 400 meters are gone. Freedom of information appeals in the years since have been met with the same response every time. The material is withheld under provisions related to national resource security. That justification might make sense for a report about extractable minerals. It's a much stranger justification for a report about a cave. Whoever redacted those pages made a choice about which specific paragraphs mattered enough to hide. That choice, more than the blacked-out text itself, is the real piece of evidence here, because it confirms that someone, at some point, read what the 1962 team wrote about the deeper chambers and decided the public shouldn't. A retired ministry clerk, tracked down, decades later through pension records, agreed to speak on condition that her name not be used. She recalled processing the 1962 file when it first came through in the mid-1960s, before any redaction had been applied. She remembered photographs attached to the original submission, plural, more than one, showing the lower chamber Ferrand described in his diary. Those photographs are not in the file today. There's no record of their removal, no chain of custody, no note explaining where they went. They are simply absent, the way the shaft is absent from the maps that came after. And once investigators started asking whether this had happened anywhere else, they found they weren't the first people to ask. The Regional Speleological Society, that funded 3 separate expeditions to this cave system between 1965 and 1980, has financial records going back decades, approvals, budgets, correspondence between organisers and government liaisons. Every one of those 3 expeditions was cancelled before completion. Not from lack of funding. The ledgers show money already allocated, equipment already purchased, permits already approved, and then, within weeks of each planned descent, a cancellation notice with no stated reason beyond administrative review. Meeting minutes from the Society's 1978 board session survive, mostly intact except for one section. The typed minutes jump from item 4 to item 6. Item 5 is missing from the bound copy entirely, and the page numbering skips accordingly, not redacted, simply removed. A handwritten note in the margin of the following page, added later by an unknown hand, reads only, "Not for the file." 3 cancelled expeditions. 1 missing meeting item. 1 survey redacted at the exact depth where the numbers stopped matching. By the time Reyes' team applied for their own permit in 1984, they were the 4th group in 20 years to try reaching that same depth. And the first one anybody let get close. Correspondence between the Society and the Government Liaison's office, preserved in a separate collection the Liaison's family donated after his death, shows something the Society's own minutes don't. In a letter dated months before the 1984 expedition, the Liaison writes that the 1962 recommendation should be revisited before any further permits are issued. No revisiting appears to have happened. Instead, Reyes' permit was approved less than 3 weeks later, seemingly without anyone above the liaison's level acting on his warning at all, as though the recommendation reached someone's desk and simply stopped moving. That raised an uncomfortable question. If this cave had a pattern of being quietly shut down before anyone went deep enough to matter, was it the only one? It wasn't. Cross-referencing international caving archives from the same period turned up 4 other deep cave systems on 3 different continents, with strikingly similar histories. Each had an early survey with a depth reading that later official maps quietly reduced. Each had at least 1 expedition cancelled without clear explanation. 2 had disappearances of their own. Smaller, less publicised, but never fully resolved. What stood out wasn't just that the pattern repeated. It was where it repeated. When researchers plotted the depth at which each system's records went quiet, the point where measurements stopped matching, where funding dried up, where reports got thin, the numbers clustered, not identical, but close, within a narrow band, across cave systems that had no known connection to each other, on opposite sides of the planet. A coincidence explains one cave behaving strangely. It has a much harder time explaining 5 caves, unconnected by geography, geology, or governing body, all going quiet at roughly the same threshold. Something about that depth, not the cave, the depth itself, appeared to matter, and that meant the question was no longer about one shaft in one mountain range. It was about what happens, physically or otherwise, at that line in the earth. One of the 5 sites, a limestone system in a different mountain range entirely, had its own version of Ferron's diary, a set of private notes kept by a geologist on a 1971 expedition there, describing an unlogged chamber at a depth strikingly close to the one Ferron recorded 9 years earlier and thousands of kilometres away. Neither geologist could have read the other's private notes. Ferron's diary didn't surface publicly until long after both men were dead. And yet their descriptions, independent of each other, converge on the same unexplained detail. A warmth in the deep chamber that neither man could account for, given the surrounding rock. 2 scientists, 2 continents, no contact between them, describing the same anomaly at the same depth using almost the same restrained, uncertain language. That kind of convergence is difficult to write off as coincidence, and difficult to explain any other way without asking a much larger question. At 2 of the 5 sites, researchers examining archived expedition photographs, the ones that did make it back, noticed marks on the cave walls near that shared depth threshold. Not natural fracture patterns, regular, repeated grooves, cut at consistent intervals, the kind associated with deliberate tool use, rather than water or mineral erosion. Similar marks appear at both sites, thousands of kilometres apart, with no record of any shared culture or trade route connecting them. Geologists who reviewed the strata surrounding these marks estimate the exposed rock face dates back tens of thousands of years before either site was discovered by any modern expedition. If the marks are genuinely tool-made, something was working at that depth long before anyone alive today, or in any written record, could account for. That reframes everything that came before it: the 1962 survey, the redactions, the cancelled expeditions, the elders' warning about a place that doesn't let you count right. None of it may have been about hiding a discovery. It may have been about managing the return of one, the rediscovery of something that had already been found once by someone else a very long time ago, and then deliberately left alone. Which brings the story back to a stacked pile of climbing gear 40 meters from a cave mouth, and 3 people who went looking for an unmapped shaft and never explained what they found in it. In 2011, a hiker exploring a collapsed section of the original cave entrance found a fragment of laminated paper wedged into a crack in the rock, weathered but partially legible. It matched the paper stock used by the Regional Geological Survey Office in the 1960s. On it, part of a hand-drawn line continues past where every official map ends, sketching a passage that, according to every published record, does not exist. No agency has claimed the fragment. No official statement has addressed how it got there, or whether it's authentic. It sits, catalogued but unexplained, in the same category as the frayed rope anchor, the missing meeting item, the blacked-out paragraphs, and Halvard Reyes' notebook. Pieces of a record that all point toward the same conclusion, without any of them proving it outright. What's certain is this: 3 people went past the second chamber. The gear they left behind was stacked, not scattered, the way you leave something when you plan to come back. The official file on their disappearance closes with a single line: cause undetermined, further investigation not warranted. The same phrasing, almost word for word, used to close the file on the 1962 recommendation 22 years earlier. 2 files, 2 decades apart, the same unanswered recommendation, the same missing depth. And somewhere below that threshold, in a cave system whose true shape has never been fully mapped, whatever Reyes found is still down there. Kay Voss died in 2009. In the years before her death, she gave no further interviews and turned down every request to return to the site, even for documentary crews offering full funding and support. The one time a journalist managed to ask her, off the record, whether she believed the other 3 were still alive somewhere in that system, she reportedly didn't answer the question directly. She said only that some places don't let you leave the way you came in, and that whatever waits at the bottom of that particular shaft, it had been waiting long before any of them arrived, and would go on waiting, long after everyone who remembers the notebook is gone too.